and welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the realities of owning a classic car that I think can get lost up in the kind of joy and excitement and thrill of the idea of owning a classic car, and also particularly with dailying it and how kind of some of that gets overlooked by kind of the concept of I'd quite like to have a classic daily. I know on this channel I talk about it loads, and I'm a huge advocate for using your classic and enjoying your classic, but at that initial stage, which I know so many people go to YouTube for, it can be important to make sure that there is some coverage of the things that can sometimes get overlooked. So I guess one of the misconceptions is that dailying certain classic cars works out cheaper than a modern car, and I guess it depends on what you're comparing it to. If you're comparing it to a car that's kind of on finance, that's a very, very modern car, then yeah, you probably are going to end up with a cheaper end result from dailying certain classics with good parts availability, good spares and things like that. But if you're comparing it to buying a second-hand cheap runabout that's kind of got a pretty decent MOT history and things like that, then reality is a classic is definitely not going to be cheaper, because you are going to end up having to spend money inevitably on welding. You're going to have to spend time or money on doing maintenance and repairs more regularly yourself. A modern engine doesn't need a service as frequently as an older engine does. It's less needy in other ways. It doesn't have kind of so much wear and tear in a lot of cases because the parts are built to last a little bit better up to higher mileage and higher speeds and things. So it's a case of depending on what it is. There are modern cars that you can get reasonably cheap insurance on, you can get reasonably good deals on, and are gonna get you from A to B. And so if you think, I'm doing this because it's going to be cheaper, you're fooling yourself, because there are so many hidden costs with owning a classic that often get overlooked, because there's this kind of story that goes round about how it's a better deal. And that insurance thing is a really big thing that for a while was kind of a little bit of a loophole. It was a case of if you did buy something like a Morris Minor as a young person, you'd probably get cheaper insurance than if you bought something a bit more modern. That isn't always the case anymore. It is getting increasingly difficult once again for people, particularly those under 25, to get insurance on a Morris Minor if it is their only car. If they're looking for classic insurance, at least anyway. If they're looking at other insurance companies that will take on a Morris Minor or trying to build up a no claims bonus, then they might have more luck, but it's not necessarily much cheaper than the alternative of, again, a well chosen modern cheap runabout for a car. It really does come down to what it is you're looking for, and what it is you're looking for is going to differ from person to person. If you're looking for a classic that is going to come with all of the kind of caveats that come with it, then this sort of stuff isn't going to bother you. But if you were looking for kind of outs, if you're looking for I guess for a better term, an element of kind of clout, to kind of brag about and think that this is an easy option. It's really not. And if you're after the ability to keep up with traffic at all times, to be able to guarantee yourself the ability to get from A to B on time at the time that Google Maps is predicting, then a classic is not necessarily for you. Or if you are looking for a classic, it's making sure you get the right classic. Things like Morris Minors ran for like 20 years. There's huge variance in what you're getting from earlier in the period to later in the period. And the same with like Hillman Imps. Your differences between the earlier ones and the later ones, things like the strength of the crankshaft and stuff, you need to be aware of that when you go into it. And I was kind of a little bit foolish. I didn't know huge amounts about Morris Minors when I went into buying Peggy, but I knew that if I got a later one, then yes, the steel might not be as good and things like that, but I knew that the engine was bigger and that it was kind of built for a slightly faster pace of life. I wouldn't dream of hopping in an earlier car, a 1930s car, and thinking, oh, Google Maps says this, I'll add a little bit on, but really I think I'll get there on time, or I think I'll be able to keep up with the majority of traffic that's going on. That's not what it's built for. It's not what it's there for. It's there for enjoying the journey, respecting the motoring, having an experience whilst you're getting there, and expecting kind of a bit of fun and adventure on the way to places, and things not to be an immediate, oh, we've got there with record time. And so it's finding that correct classic for what it is you're looking for. If you're looking for a daily, what are your daily requirements? Are your roads expecting you to go regularly 50, 60 miles an hour? Are you happy? Are you confident enough, especially as a young person potentially, to sit at 45, 50 if needs be? Or are you going to have to look at something from the 80s or 90s that's going to be able to sit at regular traffic speeds and you're not going to feel bad about a potential tailback? Are you comfortable to go on dual carriageways if that's what you feel is a better option, and sit in the slower lane at slower speeds and let everyone overtake you? What are your personal limits? And it might well be that at some point you give it a go and you realise it's not for you, and that the anxiety and the worry and things doesn't outweigh the fun that you were having with kind of driving the car, and so you stick with it. Or you find that the anxiety and the worry and the, oh, it's not doing this and it's not kind of meeting these expectations, means that, okay, I swap the car out and I find something new. And that expecting to get somewhere at a set time, I've been incredibly lucky with Peggy that I've been able to kind of get a good idea of how to accurately predict from Google Maps, okay, this is the expected time, I'm going to add X amount of time, and that's probably about when I'll get there. I need to add some time for a stop or whatever, and that gives me a good idea. But equally, you can't predict these cars. You can't always predict modern cars. We have issues with our little Kia Picanto in terms of it going through tyres sometimes because the sidewall's so small, and you can't predict that you're going to get a flat tyre or whatever, and that's going to add time to your journey. But statistically, if you're not used to running the car, if you're not used to enjoying the car and working on the car and getting to grips with it, issues that start off small can come up as a later issue when you're on that journey that you wanted to get there for a set time, and it's not going to happen. And that's something that you're going to have to be somewhat prepared for when you get a classic. Sometimes you have to make a judgment call. Do I go in the classic and enjoy the journey and accept that I might be a bit late, that something might happen? Or do I need an element of reliability? And the element of reliability might well come from your Classic if you've got the experience, if you've got the use factor out of it, where things that go wrong come up at other times, rather than I only take it out once a month and that's going to be my kind of time where things do come up, because it's the only time that the car has to tell me that something's wrong. The other thing you have to obviously allow time for is people talking to you. My trip to the shops, my trip to fuel, whatever it might be, you're always getting stopped and talked to, and if you're not ready for that, then obviously that's going to be an element of your daily life if you're driving one of these cars. And there is a kind of responsibility that even if, I'm a bit in a rush, if someone's talking to you about the car, then you kind of have to talk back to them a little bit, as long as they're being nice and respectful. You are a custodian of this car, and you're part of kind of making that car make it forward to the future, and thus you need to kind of engage with people to help people stay happy with them existing, to be keen to see them out on the roads, all of those things, because that's what protects Classics to an extent from just getting kind of massively penalised in legislation and rules, is an element of public support. And that sometimes needs to come from a bit further afield than just the people that own the cars. But also you might be inspiring someone to go out and rebuy a car that they remember from their childhood, rescue a car that they've been thinking about, whatever that might be. Those conversations are really important, and that is truly a part of owning a Classic. And at this time of year, there's a lot of responsibility in terms of looking after it, even though it's absolutely freezing outside. There'll be little jobs that you have to do, even though, like we've had lately, the weather's freezing, it's absolutely awful, you don't really want to be outside underneath a car. But if you're dailying it, the job needs doing, otherwise you're going to end up with problems later down the line. And if you're not willing to get out there and do those things, then you're going to have to be willing to pay somebody else to do those things, otherwise the car's going to suffer, it's not going to be safe and things like that. Another huge, I think, misconception about dailying a Classic is that it's easier because you don't have to have an MOT, because they're MOT exempt. That doesn't mean that the car can't be safe though, and that's a big thing that I think the Classic car scene is having to battle now. Because of that MOT exemption, some people are driving around in cars that would not pass an MOT, and that's dangerous. That's not what we need. As a driver, you are responsible for making sure your vehicle is safe, regardless of whether it has an MOT or it doesn't have an MOT. And having an MOT obviously proves to an extent that on that particular day things were fine and you got a second pair of eyes to look over things. Not having an MOT is not an excuse to go around driving a car that's got issues that relate to safety. And it's a really important aspect, because if an accident did happen that was caused by a Classic car without an MOT, not only would the insurance probably wheedle out of ever paying it, but it would be hugely awful press for all of the Classic car scene about kind of people driving around in unsafe and irresponsible situations. It's also often overlooked that it is not easier emotionally. I have never got emotional or upset about something happening to our Kia Picanto. It's there, it's useful, it's good, it's a nice tool to have, but a puncture's happened, it's annoying, but we'll live with it. But with Peggy, when stuff goes wrong and it seems disastrous and it's stressful and it's annoying, it feels like a little bit like a family member or a friend is hurt and I need to do something about it, because I spend an awful lot of time in her, and there's obviously the additional stress of this needs to be sorted so that I can get to and from wherever I need to get to, somewhat limited by the fact that we now have kind of surplus vehicles, but I still want her up and running and going, because being able to drive her and enjoy her is hugely beneficial to my mental health, especially at this time of year. And yet at the same time, her being broken, having an issue, something going on with her, is somewhat damaging to my mental health, because I get so stressed and upset and worried about it, especially if it's something that I'm struggling to get to grips with and fix myself. And I feel like I should be able to do that. And so there's definitely an additional expense there when it comes to the emotions. But overall, I still adore it because it was the right choice for me. And with all of that stuff, the positives definitely outweigh all of the negatives. But that's not always the case for everybody. It's an individual choice. This isn't a life that works for everybody. That's kind of the point of it. But it's making that right choice and accepting all of the little quirks, all of the little unusual aspects of it. The fact that, you know, you might hold up traffic occasionally, you might be kind of pointed at and stared at occasionally, and that's just kind of one of those things. But it's got to be worth it, and you've got to kind of suck it up and be able to deal with it, and have potentially the support network that's going to help you through that. I hope this has given kind of the other side of the argument, because obviously I'm a huge advocate still and I adore it, but I think some coverage online of the reality, some of the downsides of owning a classic car, I guess, is worth noting, because if people are making their decisions through research online, then they kind of need to be able to see both the pros and cons. And so if you're watching on YouTube, by all means pop down the bottom something I might have forgotten, and we'll have a nice chat down there. But in the meantime, thank you ever so much for listening. Thank you for supporting the podcast, however you might do that, and drive safely and happy motoring.